right, so hi everybody. We are back again. We are discussing Chapter 4 right now of Growing Up Public. And so again, it's Catherine Castonguay, Assistant Superintendent of Schools in Stoneham.
I'm Becca Lewis, the Substance Use Prevention Coordinator with the Stoneham Health Department.
I'm Colleen Martin. I'm a middle school guidance counselor.
Chris Serino, Director of Media and Digital Learning for Stoneham Public Schools.
All right. So for Chapter 4, this chapter talked a lot about classroom management tools for grades and behavior. And I was thinking a lot about this because we do have a student information system, and it gives parents access and students access. And it's something that I have experienced personally as a parent. And there is a lot of information at our fingertips. And I often wonder, like, how much is too much? When is it helpful, and when does it help us to make our lives more convenient, and when is that threshold? What is that threshold for students and for parents as well, for their overall well-being, and what's the end game with it, and how do we help parents to understand, how to use that tool most effectively in a healthy way with some boundaries. So it's sort of some thoughts that I had when I read this chapter, and I know there are many different tools that teachers use, but I think our student information system with student grades and student attendance is the predominant one that we have here in our schools and that most school districts use.
Yeah, and I think parents and students are getting flooded with this information and notifications, not only on a daily basis, but sometimes period to period. Mm-hmm. So it can be very distracting, it can be very overwhelming for students as they're interested in their grades, but it could be anxiety-provoking as well. And one thing that is a positive for these systems is that if a student is struggling and parents are getting those notifications periodically, they can intervene a lot faster than waiting till the end of the quarter. So I see that as a positive as well.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience in this due to my job as a counselor. I work with students a lot about the app, tracking their grades, but more times I get actually phone calls from parents concerned about their students' grades, and I have to remind them that sometimes it does take a few days for teachers to update, and it's not 100% accurate. I think it's a baseline. But understanding too that like the student knows how they're doing. If they received a test, the grade will be eventually back on that platform. But really trying to navigate with the parents, like, hold off a little bit, give it a little bit of time, and then follow up with the teacher or your child.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely benefits to it for parents and students, but I think it's like everything else, it's in moderation and learn and teaching our students about, how to use it. I liked, in this particular chapter, the author really talks about helping students to use it in a way that gives them a little bit of information, but also to help them to build that intrinsic motivation to learn, as opposed to just constantly checking the nature of the grading system on the student information system. I think that piece is really important. We want students to be engaged in the learning process and learn how to problem solve.
I think one role of parents in the case of kind of protecting students from this kind of obsession of constantly checking the grades is for parents to model that, not constantly checking the grades. And one of the suggestions mentioned in the book was either putting it on a device that you don't carry around in your pocket all the time, turning off notifications, or like having set regular times, like once a week, at the end of the week, or whatever that may be, of like checking. So you're not checking every single notification every single time it alerts, to kind of like heighten that obsession and anxiety over the grades.
And the boundaries are really blurred now, because when I was in school, if I did poorly on a test or a quiz, I could go home, I could think about it. I didn't have a parent immediately asking questions about it and seeing the grades. So I feel like nowadays, if there's an issue and a student's having a rough day, took an assessment and they did poorly, now they're going home and they're already thinking in their head, I have to talk to my parents about this. They already know that I failed this test. And that could be devastating. That could ruin the rest of the school day for a student, and it just rolls right into the home life.
I agree with that. And oftentimes I'll meet with students and they'll talk to me about possibly getting a bad grade. And it's like, okay, so what do we need to do to improve that grade? And I think oftentimes we miss that. Like we're forgetting about the organization. Like if we do get a poor grade, what are we going to do to get that grade up? And instead of having the parents reaching out to the teachers, it's really the student's responsibility, right? Like we want to create that ownership piece and build off of that. So these kids are having that motivation to want to be successful, and they're finding ways in which they can advocate for themselves.
I think it's another aspect of, from the last time that we met, just thinking about how for this generation of students, every aspect of their life is, through technology, that it's, from grades to social interactions, and just giving them opportunities for parents not to be tempted to drill them with questions when they come home, and to allow them the opportunity and the space, to think about it and to think about when they can have those conversations. I also agree with you, Colleen, that it is helping students, parents can help, teachers can help students to be, advocates for themselves and to problem solve. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still, a key factor in life success is just learning how to navigate and problem solve and not be reactive to, every temperature check on your grades. Mm-hmm. So.
It's another piece of the surveillance that we talked about earlier in the book mm-hmm. that the author was mentioning.
Mm. Yeah, it really is. And I think it's, from my perspective as an educator and as a parent, we do have a lot at our fingertips, but it's also opportunity for us to pause and not think that we have to use every tool that comes our way and to model that. I think that the theme in this book was mentoring and modeling. If I were to pick mm-hmm, two words, the author, that seems to come up. That's the through line for me, and how parents can help students to know how to productively use the tools that we have in a healthy way.
And it definitely takes the pressure to be constantly using surveillance on your kids. I think one of the themes is, like you were saying, the mentoring, the conversations, these small baby steps leading up to these larger skills, like before they even are in these situations, as opposed to watching their every move and feeling like you need to track them all the time and look at every single grade and check their location all the time. Like that's extremely overwhelming for any parent.
Yeah, it is. I think it's done with good intent. Mm-hmm. I think every parent, there's a lot of pressure, I think, on parents these days, too. And I think parents want to do the right thing and to support their child. So I think it's sometimes there are unintended consequences of our, I know I've made many mistakes mm-hmm. along the way. And it's just, this is a great book to help us to pause, to think about, how else we might approach things with our children.
And every family dynamic is different, right. And we mentioned that before. So it's up to the parents to think, how is my family unit doing, mm-hmm. and do I need to do it more often? Can I back off a little bit because things are going well at this point? So that's a decision that families can make too around all these different topics.
Absolutely.
Okay. And next we're going to talk about Chapter 5, which is all about setting boundaries, balancing discretion and disclosure in a tell-all world. So the book goes into so many different examples of the dangers of oversharing, and they all kind of boil down to this is an age where kids are really craving connection and belonging, and a seemingly easy and accessible way for them to get that is in different online communities, whether that's with people on the internet that they don't know or seeking it out from peers in their school or community that they do know. There's a lot of unknown and unpredictable consequences that might come with that kids aren't always necessarily prepared for or expecting or capable of dealing with. So a great part of the book is it shares all the dangers and things to look out for, but also talks about what parents can do and how to teach your kid the art of intentional sharing. So I think that would be a great part for us to focus on to kind of give some steps on what parents can do to build up these skills in their kids.
Yeah, I think here the author again, uses the word mentoring your children, and I will continue to kind of go back to that because I think adults are great examples of that, and I think most adults are on some form of social media. They're seeking connection. I think we crave connection as human beings, and so, for some students, especially our vulnerable students, they may not have the tools or the skill sets. And often, even as adults, we're learning in this new landscape of social media and technology. But to model for them, to have conversations with them, I think the author talks a lot about, being thoughtful about what you share. And I know sometimes kids are looking for attention. And so it's just kind of, seeing what the motivation is behind that, and then guiding them and asking them some questions without, I think, judging them too much. I think that's the other piece, is just trying to keep that conversation open.
I really like how the author looks at this situation through a student lens and a young person lens, and it talks about the actual dopamine levels of a student when they post something and there's a reaction online. And that's interesting, and it's something that we have to keep in mind as adults, that students and young people feel very deeply, and they're still going through learning their bodies and emotions and things like that. So when they overshare, possibly, that's a hit of dopamine, and that's something that they're craving at this point in their life.
Absolutely. I work with kids all the time about social media platforms and just providing them a safe place where they feel that they can come to. So not judging, just having these open communications, the pros and the cons, and really reminding kids that we want to make sure that what we're posting, reminding them that anyone can view that, So I always come from a loving place of non-judgmental opinions, so that way kids feel more comfortable coming to me when there is a position where they may have gotten themselves into, where they can come to a trusted adult and talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having those conversations and teaching kids, I think the author talks a lot about teaching them what they might expect. I mean, they may not get the likes that they were hoping to get, and maybe to talk through that with them, to kind of anticipate what the positive and the negative might be for them ahead of time. And it really, building their resilience for social media, I think, because it is part of our lives, and they need to learn how to lean into it and use it appropriately.
One thing that the author mentions, and I really like this, and as a parent, I like it as well, to remind students to pause before posting and be intentional with what they post. And one of the things that you could do sort of to frame it for students would be ask them if they would be okay with wearing whatever they post on a t-shirt. And then I thought about that, and I said, wow, that's really cool. That's a great idea, because a lot of students think they're anonymous online, and truly they're not. But if they were comfortable with wearing or posting whatever they wanted to do online on a t-shirt for classmates, for teachers, for parents, for grandparents to see, that might be enough for them to say, that's not the right thing to post, and maybe just take a second look at it.
Yeah, that pause is a common thread in so many of these tips, of whether it's pausing to reframe, would I wear this on a t-shirt, thinking about asking your kids to consider who's in their circle of trust, coaching your kids to trust their own sense of what feels right and wrong, and kind of thinking about that before the impulsivity of just posting something, and kind of teaching them those internal questions that hopefully just become habit for them of, before I post this, would I wear it on a t-shirt? Let me think about my circle of trust. Let me think about if this feels right to me. Let me think about the potential positive and potential negative reactions of this. And hopefully some of these things that once are spoken out loud and kind of put into practice with the parents just become like subconscious habit for them as they mature and get into posting on their own a little bit more independently.
Great point.
I think the other thing on here is the author talks a lot about teaching children to how to navigate and how to respond to maybe concerning posts of their peers. And so I think those are really important conversations to have at home, so that children know when to get an adult, if there's a child or a friend or somebody they know that might be posting something that's concerning, that they can, seek out the appropriate help and not feel badly about it. I think so often kids are afraid of telling on each other.
Tattletaling,
Right,
yeah, sure,
right.
right. Yeah.
But it is now used. A lot of people use it to share, and sometimes they are sharing personal things that an adult might need to know. So I think having those conversations can empower kids to help each other. Another piece that I thought was interesting in here that the author talked about at the end of the chapter was that this generation is sort of changing our culture with what is being shared online, and that we as adults can help them and to teach them to pause, but they may also teach us too, because things that they post that's part of their culture I might be very uncomfortable with. So it is that kind of balance and tension, a generational tension between what we think is appropriate, not appropriate, and what they're doing as part of their generation. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Okay, now we're going to talk about Chapter 6, Sexting, and Chapter 7, Damage Control, when things go wrong. I want to start off by sharing an excerpt from the book. We must actively mentor our kids on consent, flirting, relationships, and negotiating boundaries. We must help them make safe and ethical choices that honor themselves and others. So I wanted to talk about creating a safe and open environment so that we can prevent this. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about is creating safe spaces in the hopes of preventing issues. So before we get into what to do when things go wrong, what are some steps that parents can take to help prevent issues, especially around sexting, before they occur?
When I was reading this, I took a lot away about just thinking about my own family, right? And like having these difficult conversations that no one really wants to have, but we need to have. And, we all, our goal is to raise children who are thoughtful and loving, but also understanding that they're children. They're going to make mistakes. And we want to make sure that they know that they can come to us if things are going south, right? And we want to have them honor people's boundaries. We want to have them be respectful. So just putting myself in a position where if my daughter was to come to me, like how I would react to the situation. And I think a lot of it is just being open-minded, like understanding that at one point or another, she is going to struggle. She is going to fail. And I have to be ready for that. And this book was just highlighted so many wonderful ways in which I can connect to my daughter on a more loving avenue rather than kind of punishment.
Yeah, I think I thought about it as a parent as well. I have older boys, and, giving them a phone, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, I can't remember at this point, but I don't know that at that time I was proactive about, like, how I would react, or, thinking ahead of, what apps might they be on. And the apps keep changing. It was really hard to keep up with that, and not having sort of an old school approach or reaction to something that they did, or if they were upset about something, thinking about how I might be supportive to them, and thinking ahead of, well, something is going to happen, so how do I pull them aside and have that open conversation? They're already upset if they posted a picture and it went sideways, or it was a negative experience for them. It's really kind of picking up the pieces after it happened, and being loving and caring, and that's really hard because it's unpredictable. We're not sure of all of this, especially I'm still learning, and I was then and still learning now. So I think the author she offers a lot to think about, and it is sometimes when I was reading through this, I thought, gosh, this is really overwhelming. So it was really just focusing in and honing in on what I connected with and what I could take away and use. And I think that parents might there's a lot of takeaways, but I think in reading this, if the parent was going to pick it up and read it, that maybe to approach it that way.
Yeah, great point. For me, this topic is scary. Reading through it, there's a lot to digest here, and I have a young daughter, so thinking about the future with our family and things that could go south, very scary stuff. And I agree with you. I think being proactive as opposed to reactive would be a great approach for my family. And everybody has different morals in their family, and they have to deal with it the way that they're going to deal with it. But if something were to happen in my family where sexting was involved, and I didn't address it as a parent with my child, I would feel like I did a disservice. I was in the wrong. And that's a place that I never want to be in. So I think being proactive, yes, it's a very strange conversation to have, I can imagine. But doing so might help. And if that prevents shame for my daughter in the future, in case an image was leaked or went to different people that it wasn't supposed to, if I can prevent that from happening, I feel like I did a better job as a parent than not addressing it.
Chris, I agree with you 100%. And when you were just talking about that, like I often, when my daughter does do something, like I share a personal experience from my childhood because I've experienced, we all have, like with things that we've done wrong, and just knowing that we're all human. And I think sometimes, like for my daughter, she thinks that I'm this perfect person, and I'm not. And just sharing my own personal stories with her, I think helps her along the way, like understand, like, okay, mommy has had her own struggles, in hopes that she never feels afraid to come to me if she's in trouble, to never feel that I'm going to get extremely upset with her. Like, this is a family situation, and that's how we're going to handle it.
Great point.
I love that. I think the conversations that have to do with preventing sexting don't have to be about sexting. They can just be about creating open conversations, creating a safe space regardless of the topic. As a parent, you're never going to be able to talk about every single potential risk before it happens, but you can create an environment and a family culture of no matter what it is, I'm here for you, I will hear your side. It is you and me versus the problem, not me versus you as a parent and a child. So I really like that.
I think going into chapter 7, damage control, like what to do when things go wrong, was a great chapter. I think that there was so many tips and tricks along the way for parents to kind of help. I think, moving from the chapter 6 on sexting, and if something were to go wrong right into this chapter, a parent would feel that they had strategies, and that's what we're looking for, is a strategy as to how to help kids to navigate what to do after if a post goes viral that was unintended, and how to pick up the pieces there. I think the author talks about mistakes with specificity. So I think that was really, it might be kids just being kids, but she's also talking about things that kids can be careless. And when you're online, it depersonalizes people. And so they might make a comment or poke fun at somebody, and it might cause great harm, to another person's psyche and sense of self. So it's, again, having those conversations which ahead of time are non-negotiables, and how we would treat people when we're in person and sitting next to them is the same as when they're on social media.
This chapter also, which I really enjoyed, was it went beyond the response of a family, and it talked about a community's response if something goes wrong, and how a community can support somebody to sort of restore what was done. And I thought that was a great part. We want Stoneham to be a better community for all. So if we can take part in any of this, that's great. That's just going to build up Stoneham even stronger.
To piggyback on that, Colleen was saying, when we were talking earlier about, what can we do as a school community, and how do we teach our kids and be proactive? But, a classroom can have a conversation. A guidance counselor, a school adjustment counselor here, if something goes viral in a certain grade level, can pull together groups and talk about that. Like, who are we as a school? Who are we at the middle school to the high school? And how do we help one another? Because it could be any one of us, right? So I love that too.
Be in that role of the upstander.
Yes.
Instead of the bystander.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing in this chapter that I thought a lot about was consent. I think it's so easy today. We are people, students of every age have some type of device on their person all the time, and they make videos. It's part of how they socialize, of what's happening during their school day, what's happening after school. And it's really important for us to really think about that, and maybe as a school community at some point to, and I know that we do here, but maybe to focus in on it a little bit more about making sure that we have consent, that it's not just, there are kids in our videos that may or may not want to be, or, they're posting pictures that they may not have permission to post. And I think we touched upon that in our last session, but I think it kind of is weaving itself again through here, this chapter, and making sure that we teach our children about, when it's appropriate and if it's, if everybody's okay with it at any given time.
I like the highlights that they addressed in the book, like don't post something that isn't yours to post, be careful about anonymous accounts, humor is complicated, rethink the urge to record,
Yeah.
and rethink the urge to share. A big one that I always tackle is the humor is complicated, right? Something that you think might be funny may be extremely hurtful to another person, especially in that middle school age group, for sure.
Yeah, with that impulsivity, they're not thinking that way. And if they can just take that moment to pause, think about the reaction of another person, how they're going to feel about it, that could save.
And I think the more parents and adults in the community who are having these conversations about kind of the steps, the internal thought process to go through before you post something, the more it'll just become a norm. And hopefully it evolves to just be kind of just like an assumed thing once the majority of students kind of have this like code of ethics and just code of just community like guidelines that they have amongst themselves of like, oh, you don't post things of other people, you don't post X, Y, and Z things. Like, I think culture like kind of shifts in that way. And I think as adults, we can kind of help it along by like guiding these questions and having these conversations and creating these open spaces that hopefully then they do that for themselves.
Absolutely. I think the other thing for parents in this chapter is there are some very specific strategies to do if your child gets caught up in something, and here the author is talking about, and I think it's with any situation, but I think when there's something heightened, when it's public, when there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion for us as parents, especially with children, and it's kind of going back to validating your child's experience, keeping them safe, taking steps to examine what their actions are, taking steps to help repair the harm if there is any or whatever it is at that time, and then helping them to move forward. And I think the inclination for any of us, especially children and tweens and teens, is to want to hide from it, and that can be really dangerous. So I think it's making sure that as parents we can stay grounded in a process to kind of help them to navigate and problem solve.
Yeah, it's a great point. And towards the end of this chapter about damage control, you're right. Families probably just want it to go away. But a key piece to this, and I think it's important to note, is the reflection afterwards.
Right.
Really talking about the what, whys, whens, hows, all of that stuff, because I think that could stop something from happening again. So I think that's a key part to repairing any damage that's been done.
Okay, and to finish off, we're going to briefly discuss the last two chapters. Chapter 8, Who's Really Looking at You, Kid? Our college is really stalking kids' posts.
Yeah, so the end of the book is really interesting as well, and it's more geared towards our older high school students that are looking at postgraduate career paths or colleges, and it talks about how there's a perception that their social media posts really dictate if they're going to get into a college or not, and admission officers are looking at that social media platform. However, the book goes through it, and that doesn't seem like it's the case as much as we thought.
Yeah, I think it talks a lot about what I liked from these chapters was really focusing on a person's character instead of their brand. I really liked that tagline. I liked that part of it here. It said, when we as parents fret about our kids' reputations online, we are not so much worried about whether they are seen as good people, but how their very public life will affect their future. And by extension, how we will be perceived as parents. And I think it talks a lot about how saying like college and jobs can seem like rewards, but I think we want to continue to develop their, inner compass, who they, how they want to present themselves online or offline, and really and truly, I think representing themselves as people as opposed to someone that's trying to gain something. And I agree. I think it's an easy thing. I probably am guilty of saying it myself. Don't post that. You're not going to get into college. But it's bigger than that. It's how do you as a 15-year-old want to be at this stage in your life, and how do you stay safe? How do you act appropriately and consistent with your values and your family values? So I think it goes into a lot of that. It definitely made me think differently, because this is what you hear. This is what you say. Be careful. Stay offline. Have a low profile. Jobs are looking at that. Colleges will be looking and checking sports teams if you're an athlete, those kinds of things.
And to flip it, if you look at social media as a positive in some of these aspects, prospective companies, they might look at your social media and you can post great things that you're doing, either with coding or video editing or music or things like that. So you can really highlight those aspects of your character online.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to mention, Catherine, something that you talked about when I was reading this. It talks about, like, we should do this because we want our kids to avoid offending or harming others. Not just like, you can't go to college, right? There's so much more to it than just that. We're trying to promote this beautiful aspect of the human being themselves all around. So what I took away from that too is just like, think about the post. We want to talk about it, but we also want to have those deeper, meaningful conversations.
And I think it's not an all or nothing, situation. I think that, kids are anxious these days for a lot of reasons. And this just can create, we want, obviously, our students, our own children, to grow up with our values, our morals, and what we expect. But we want them to have expectations of themselves, but also knowing that if they made a mistake when they were 12, that it's not going to follow them and not to feed the anxiety monster, so to speak. So.
And lastly, Chapter 9, the keys to thriving as emerging adults. I think the entire book kind of, in everything we've talked about, is how to form someday potential adults. And that is our job as parents and caregivers and educators. And that has kind of been the whole topic of this book. It's one of the main topics of this podcast. It is why we're all here. It is a mission of the schools, the town, the coalition, the health department, everybody who has a stake in the health of our youth and the health of our community. So we thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully we will be doing more book clubs to come, having some guests, and seeing where else the community need is. And we're happy to be here, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.